So picture the United States during the Civil War. Picture leading the United States during the Civil War. I think to have an accurate picture of where we are, we need to quickly retrace our steps as to how we got there. North America settled in the 17th and 18th century, a land of great abundance. You put your work and effort to the soil and you're able to enjoy its fruits. Many an individual traverses an ocean to come to what would become the United States. But difficulties are there along the way. The difficulties as to how the nation is formed. What level of unity would we have? How much liberty ought to be given to different parts of the country? Ought we to live by the rule, live and let live, or ought we to have a unifying force that defines us as a country? These are all some of the questions that are worked out over the 17th and the 18th century. But by the time that independence is declared, a notion of American republicanism is stated in clear terms in the federal Constitution and in other documents. Of all that effort that went into defining what it meant to be an American, we see in the 19th century that America, the country, the Republican, liberal country, becomes democratized. And that democratization offers great hope, perhaps greater opportunity for more to engage in the American experience, but it also offers some doubting or lingering fears that perhaps we as a democratic multitude would not make the right choices. So now I want you to picture yourself as Abraham Lincoln. I've asked you to watch the film Lincoln, and I think Lincoln, the film, does a great job capturing the role of a democratic statesman and the difficulties that a democratic statesman encounters. Where do we see Lincoln at the beginning of the film? He has a nightmare. He's at the front of a ship, and that ship is moving fast. That ship is moving out of control. That ship is the United States, and he is the pilot of the ship. And really the story of Lincoln, the movie, is how can the democratic ship that is America be piloted not only in a time of war, but toward a peace. So what does Lincoln have to consider throughout this film? Well, obviously he has to consider and has considered the injustice of the institution of slavery. We've talked about its ugliness. We've talked about how evil it is. We've talked about how hypocritical it is. And Lincoln fully understands that. And he's in the midst of a war where he's trying to do what? Defeat a group that would choose disunion and the carrying over of the institution of slavery rather than keeping the Union together. Lincoln also has to be concerned with liberty. He knows that this is a country where people consent to how they're governed, so he has to pay some deference to the people's liberty, to their consent. So justice, the injustice of slavery and moving the country in a just direction is important for him. Paying deference to the liberty of the people is also important to him. But thirdly, what's important to him is peace. War is terrible. It's ugly. Death and carnage is awful to see. To see young men die fighting one another, to see brothers die fighting one another is an awful thing. So take each of those three elements. How do you pay deference properly to what is just? How do you pay deference properly to liberty or freedom? And how do you pay deference to peace? And which of these at one time or another ought you to weigh more than the other? That's the issue that Lincoln is dealing with, leading our ship of state. So the first interview I want to direct your attention to is an interview that he has with a congressman, an abolitionist congressman named Thaddeus Stevens. And Stevens is very, very upset with Lincoln because he believes that Lincoln hasn't done enough in the cause of fighting against slavery. He's allowing it to go on while they're fighting a war, but he hasn't stated in clear terms like an abolitionist would that there'll be no room for error, no room for adjustment to the individual who fought in this war. And Lincoln responds to Stevens, I love your position. I love that you've advocated against this ugly institution, but I've got to lead people, and not all people are where you are on the issue, so I've got to bring them along. And Stevens says, I don't care about the people. Tell the people what to do. Even if you have to be tyrannical with your power, tell the people this is unjust and be done with it. And Lincoln looks at Stevens and says, I get that you're moved by this great moral compass. But if I am being moved by that moral compass, desecrated the country, ravaged the country in order to arrive at a just conclusion, would have been worth the journey to get to that point. Here, Lincoln, balancing his desire for justice but not wanting to be a tyrant. Also later in the movie, a very important scene, we see the problem of peace versus justice. Lincoln has the opportunity at the end of the film to have Southern delegates come forward and to have a peace struck between the North and the South. But if he does that before the passage of the 13th Amendment, perhaps that statement or principle of right or justice will be set aside. A peace will be had with the South, but nothing will be accomplished. So Lincoln, determined to not have more people die, holds back from bringing that delegation forward to the North until the 13th Amendment passes and becomes law, and until we can move the direction toward a new course, toward Lincoln's hoped-for course, toward a new birth of freedom. The question for us in this module is, what is Lincoln after? Are we able to accomplish as a nation after the Civil War? We'll know that Lincoln will be assassinated. We know that he will not be there to practice malice toward none. He will not be there to lead the American ship of state after the Civil War. But do we take what's enshrined in his words and deeds as a president, and does that become the directive course for the United States after the Civil War? That is the question that will take up this module.